Tom Bradford laughed, not politely. A genuine, disbelieving laugh that echoed in his office at Bradford John Deere in Story County, Iowa. It was Monday morning, September 18th, 2024. Tom owned the dealership, had for 32 years, knew land values cold. He'd appraised hundreds of farms, knew what sold for what price per acre across 5 counties. Standing in front of his desk was Frank Morrison, age 74, wearing faded Wrangler jeans with a tear at the knee, a threadbare flannel shirt that had seen better days in the 1990s, work boots caked with dried mud. Frank farmed somewhere east of Nevada, Iowa. Tom knew of him but didn't know him well. Frank had never been a big customer, bought parts occasionally, nothing major. Frank had just said, "I want to list my farm for sale, $5 million. Tom laughed. "Frank, I appreciate you thinking of me for the listing, but $5 million, that's optimistic. It's the asking price." "Frank, how many acres are we talking?" 800. Tom did quick math. 800 acres at $5 million is $62.50 per acre. "Frank, land in this area sells for $3,200 to $3,700 per acre. Your farm is worth maybe 2.6, 2.8 million. Definitely not 5. "It's worth $5 million. Tom leaned back in his chair. "Frank, I've sold 48 farms in the last 10 years. I know values. Unless you've got a shopping mall on your property or oil wells, 800 acres isn't worth $5 million. "It's worth it." Tom's amusement faded to annoyance. This was wasting his time. "Frank, why don't you tell me what makes your farm so special?" Frank pulled a folder from his jacket, placed it on Tom's desk. "Everything's in there. Soil tests, infrastructure assessments, yield histories, improvement documentation. Read it. Then tell me if it's worth $5 million. Tom opened the folder skeptically. Started reading. First page, soil test results from 2023. Organic matter content averaged 5.8% across all 800 acres. Tom blinked. Normal Iowa farmland averaged 3.2 to 4.1%. Organic matter above 5% was exceptional. Above 5.5% was rare. Second page, drainage tile documentation. Every single acre, all 800, had modern subsurface drainage installed. Pattern tile at 40-foot spacing. Cost documentation showed $427,000 invested in tiling between 1987 and 2019. Third page, soil amendment history. Frank had applied gypsum, lime, compost, and cover crops consistently since 1985. Total documented investment, $312,000 over 39 years. Fourth page, infrastructure. 6 grain bins totaling 110,000 bushels storage. Shop building 80 kunzert 20 feet, fully equipped. Machine shed 60 by 100 feet. All structures built between 1988 and 2006. Total documented construction cost, $384,000. Fifth page, yield histories. 10-year average corn, yield 221 bushels per acre. County average, 187 bushels. Difference, 34 bushels per acre. On 800 acres corn, 27,200 extra bushels annually. Tom stopped reading. Looked at Frank. Your 10-year average is 221 bushels? Yes. County average is 187. Correct. That's 34 bushels more per acre than your neighbors. Every year, consistently, for over 20 years now. Tom did math. At current corn price of $4.20, 34 extra bushels per acre was $142.80 per acre additional income. Times 800 acres, $114 to $240 extra gross income annually, every year, consistently. Frank, how are you getting these yields? 40 years of soil improvement, drainage tile so my ground never floods, never stays wet. Organic matter, so nutrients hold and crops thrive. Cover crops to prevent erosion and add nitrogen. Consistent attention to pH balance. Testing every 3 years. Adjusting based on results. Tom kept reading. Page 6. Forestry. Frank had planted 80 acres of timber in 1990 on marginal ground. Current timber value assessed at $380,000. Page 7. Rental history. Frank had rented out his grain storage to neighbors for the past 15 years. Average annual income, $18,400. Passive income from infrastructure. Page 8, water rights. Frank had drilled irrigation wells in 1998 and 2004. 2 wells, permitted, active, could irrigate 320 acres if needed. In drought years, that capability was worth significant premium. Tom closed the folder, looked at Frank with completely different eyes. Frank, you've invested over $1 million in improvements to this farm. 1.14 million, actually, documented in that folder. Your yields are 34 bushels above county average. Consistently, not just good years, every year. Your organic matter is 50% higher than normal, result of 4 decades of work. Tom recalculated. Standard farmland, 3,500 acre times 800 acres equals $2.8 million. But Frank's wasn't standard farmland. Premium for superior yields, 800 per acre, conservative estimate based on income differential. Premium for infrastructure, 400 acre, buildings, storage, wells. Premium for timber, 475 per acre on those 80 acres. Premium for drainage tile, 300 per acre, replacement cost basis. Premium for soil quality, 600 per acre, organic matter premium. Total premium, approximately $2,100 per acre. Plus base $3,500 equals $5,600 per acre. Times 800 acres, $4.48 million. Frank's asking price of $5 million was actually reasonable, maybe even conservative. Tom looked at Frank. I apologize, I shouldn't have laughed. Most people do. They see my clothes, see my truck, assume I'm struggling. They don't see 40 years of work nobody noticed. How did you do this? How did you invest $1 million in improvements while everyone else was just trying to survive? Frank sat down. Tom, I'm going to tell you a story. It starts in 1982. I was 32 years old, farming 800 acres I'd inherited from my father in 1979. The farm was worth maybe $900 an acre, so $720,000 total. I owed nothing. My father had paid it off before he died. Tom listened. Everyone around me was expanding, buying new equipment, going into debt. The advice was, grow or die, get bigger or get out. I watched my neighbors borrow hundreds of thousands for land and equipment. They looked successful. New tractors, new trucks, nice shops. I went the opposite direction, kept my paid-for equipment, drove a 10-year-old truck, lived in the house my father built in 1958, and instead of expanding, I started improving. First investment, 1985, soil testing. Cost me $800 to test all 800 acres. Results showed my pH was 5.8, too acidic. My organic matter was 2.9, too low. My phosphorus and potassium were marginal. I spent $14,000 on lime application in 1985 and 1986. My neighbors thought I was crazy. Frank, why spend 14 grand on lime when you could buy a down payment on more land? I told them I'd rather have excellent ground than more mediocre ground. They didn't understand. Second investment, 1987 to 1995, drainage tile. I tiled 40 acres per year for 8 years, cost me about $53,000 total. My neighbor said, Frank, the ground drains fine naturally. Why waste money on tile? I told them, tile means I can plant earlier, harvest later, never lose yield to wet spots. They still didn't understand. Third investment, 1989 onward, cover crops. Started with 20 acres, expanded to my whole rotation by 1995. Cost me about $4,000 annually, seed and application. My neighbors said, Frank, you're planting crops you don't harvest. That's insane. I told them, cover crops add nitrogen, prevent erosion, build organic matter. They called it hippie farming. Tom was fascinated. What happened to your neighbors, the ones who were expanding and borrowing? Frank's expression darkened. Most of them lost everything in the 80s and 90s. The ones who survived into the 2000s are still farming, but they're tired, worn out, fighting against their ground instead of working with it. Their yields are average. Mine are exceptional. Tom, here's what I learned. Land value isn't just about acres. It's about what those acres can produce. My 800 acres generate income, like 1,200 acres of average ground. That extra income, compounded over 40 years, is worth millions. Tom asked, "Why are you selling now?" "I'm 74. My kids aren't interested in farming. Both became doctors, live in cities. I could keep farming another few years, but I'd rather sell while I can still enjoy the money. Travel with my wife. See things we never saw because I was always working." "What will you do with 5 million?" Frank smiled. "After taxes, I'll net maybe 3.6 million. That's enough to live comfortably, help my kids with their student loans, set up college funds for grandkids, and donate to agricultural education. I don't need 5 houses or fancy cars, just enough to be comfortable." Tom asked the key question. "Frank, why come to me? You could list this with a real estate company." "Because I want someone who sells to farmers. Someone who'll find a buyer who'll appreciate what I built. I don't want some investment group that'll strip the timber and mine the soil. I want a young farmer who'll continue what I started. You know those people. Real estate companies don't." Tom was moved. "I'll list it. 5 million asking price. And Frank, I'll make sure it goes to someone who deserves it." The farm listed on September 20th, 2024. Tom wrote the description carefully. 800 acres of premium farmland in Story County. Not just land, a 40-year investment in agricultural excellence. Soil organic matter 5.8%, exceptional. Complete tile drainage on all acres. 10-year average yields 221 bu's acre corn, 34 bu acre above county average. 114 metum in documented improvements. Infrastructure includes 110,000 bu grain storage, fully equipped shop, machine shed, irrigation wells, 80 acres mature timber. This isn't farmland. This is an income-generating agricultural operation at peak efficiency. Asking $5,000. The listing hit the market. Tom expected maybe 5 to 8 inquiries. He got 47 in the first week. 17 were from investment groups wanting to buy cheap and flip expensive. Tom rejected them immediately. Frank didn't want corporate buyers. 23 were from farmers, but most balked at the price. 5 million for 800 acres. That's crazy. They couldn't see past the per-acre number. 7 were serious inquiries from farmers who actually read the documentation. They understood what Frank had built. One inquiry stood out. Daniel and Rebecca Trent, ages 38 and 36, farming 480 acres 40 miles south. They'd been saving for 10 years to expand, had $1.2 million in cash, plus perfect credit for financing. Tom arranged a showing. Frank met them on a Tuesday morning. Daniel and Rebecca walked the property for 4 hours, examined soil, checked drainage, inspected buildings, reviewed yield records, asked detailed questions. At the end, sitting in Frank's modest kitchen, Rebecca said, "Mr. Morrison, your farm is worth more than 5 million. Frank smiled. "How do you figure?" "The income differential alone. 34 extra bushels per acre annually, times 800 acres is 27,200 bushels. At $4.20, that's 114,000 extra income per year. Capitalized at 5% return, that's worth 2.28 million in additional value. Plus the infrastructure, plus the timber, plus the irrigation capability. Honestly, you're underpriced at 5 million. Frank liked them immediately. "Why do you want this farm?" Daniel answered, "Because we want to build what you built. We've been farming conventionally, decent yields, but nothing special. We want to learn regenerative practices, improve our soil, increase organic matter. Your farm is proof it works. We want to continue your legacy." Frank sold them the farm for $4. And 9 million took $100,000 off asking price because they committed to continuing his soil improvement practices and agreed to mentor other farmers interested in regenerative agriculture. The sale closed November 2024. Daniel and Rebecca took possession January 2025. Tom Bradford earned $147,000 commission on the sale, largest commission he'd ever made. But more than the money, he learned a lesson. The week after closing, Tom was having coffee with another dealer. The dealer asked about the sale. "Heard you got $5 million for the Morrison place. How'd you pull that off? That's way above market." Tom bristled. "It wasn't above market. That farm was worth every penny of $5 million. Frank Morrison spent 40 years building value nobody else could see. The problem isn't that he asked too much. The problem is that most farmers don't understand what real value looks like." The dealer laughed. "Come on, Tom. $5 million for 800 acres? Land around here is $3,500 an acre. Bad land is $3,500. Morrison's land produces like 1,200 acres of bad land. Do the math." Tom thought about that Monday morning when Frank walked in. Thought about how he'd laughed, how he'd judged Frank by his appearance, old jeans, worn shirt, muddy boots. Frank had looked poor, but he'd built a $5 million asset while everyone else who looked rich went broke. In December 2024, Tom changed how he evaluated farms, started asking about soil tests, organic matter content, drainage infrastructure, yield histories. Stopped assuming that acres times average price equals value. Found 3 other farms similar to Frank's. Farmers who'd invested in improvements nobody else noticed. Listed all 3 at premium prices. All 3 sold within 90 days. In March 2025, Tom spoke at an Iowa Farm Bureau meeting. Topic: real farm value versus apparent farm value. 40 years ago, Frank Morrison started improving his soil while everyone else was buying land and equipment on credit. Everyone thought Frank was behind the times. Turns out Frank was ahead of his time. He built $5 million in value through patient investment in things nobody else valued: drainage, organic matter, cover crops, soil health. The farmers who looked successful, new trucks, big equipment, lots of acres. Most of them went broke or barely survive. Frank, who looked poor, built generational wealth. The lesson? Stop judging value by appearance. Start judging by fundamentals. That speech resonated. 12 farmers contacted Tom afterward, asking how to improve their soil like Frank did. Tom connected them with Daniel and Rebecca Trent, who'd committed to teaching others. By 2025, Story County had a small movement of farmers focusing on soil health instead of acreage expansion. They called themselves the Morrison Method farmers, named after Frank. Frank Morrison retired to a modest home in Ames, traveled with his wife to places they'd dreamed about for decades, donated $400,000 to Iowa State's agronomy department for soil health research, set up $200,000 college funds for his 4 grandchildren, lived comfortably on investment income from his remaining $2.9 million, never bought a new truck, never built a showpiece house, just lived simply, enjoyed life, watched his grandchildren grow. In January 2026, Frank received a call from Daniel Trent. "Mr. Morrison, I wanted to update you. First year farming your place. Our place now. Corn yielded 218 bushels per acre." Frank smiled. 3 bushels below my average. What happened? Transition year. We're still learning your system, but we're committed. We've also inspired 6 of our neighbors to start cover crops and soil testing. Your legacy is spreading. Frank felt satisfied. His 40 years of work everyone mocked, work nobody understood, was continuing. The farm he'd built would keep producing exceptional yields for the Trents, who'd teach others still. Value that nobody saw became value everybody wanted. The farmer who looked poorest built the most. The dealer who laughed learned the most important lesson of his career: never judge a farm by its farmer's boots. The farmer said his farm was worth $5 million. The dealer laughed. then got shocked when documentation proved the farmer right. 40 years of invisible work created visible value. Sometimes the richest farms look the poorest from the road. But the story of how Frank Morrison built $5 million in value while everyone thought he was falling behind deserves deeper examination. The contrast between Frank and his neighbors became stark in the 1980s and 1990s. Let's examine three specific comparisons. Neighbor 1, Carl Henderson, farmed directly west of Frank's. Carl inherited 640 acres in 1978, same time frame as Frank. Carl's approach: expand aggressively. Between 1980 and 1985, Carl borrowed $480,000 to buy an additional 480 acres. Total operation, 1,120 acres. More land than Frank. More acres meant more income, right? Wrong. Carl's yields averaged 168 bushels per acre through the 1990s. Frank's averaged 198 by then. Carl's 1,020 acres at 168 bushels produced 188 and 160 bushels total. Frank's 800 acres at 198 bushels produced 158 and 400 bushels. Carl had 40% more land, but only 19% more production. But Carl also had $480,000 in debt, plus equipment debt. His debt service was approximately $64,000 annually through the 1990s. Frank had zero debt. Carl lost his farm in 2004, foreclosed after struggling for 20 years. His 1,120 acres sold for $2,240 per acre, $2,588. After paying off debts totaling $2,160,000, Carl netted $348,800. 26 years of farming ended with less than $350,000. Frank, farming 800 acres with no debt and superior yields, accumulated wealth steadily. By 2004, Frank's net worth exceeded $2 million. Neighbor 2, James Pritchard, farmed directly north of Frank's. James farmed 720 acres, took a different approach than Carl. James didn't expand, but he did upgrade equipment aggressively. Between 1982 and 2002, James bought 6 different tractors, always trading up, always financing. James is thinking new equipment means efficiency, means higher yields, means more profit. But his yields averaged 174 bushels through the 1990s, only slightly better than Carl's, well below Frank's. James spent approximately $380,000 on equipment debt over those 20 years. His tractors were always newer than Frank's. His shop looked better, but his yields never caught Frank's. James retired in 2018, sold his 720 acres for $3,200 per acre, $2,304,000. After paying off remaining equipment debt and living expenses, netted about $1.6 million. Respectable, but significantly less than Frank's value. Neighbor 3, Robert Klein, farm south of Frank's. Robert farmed 560 acres, took the middle road. Didn't expand aggressively like Carl. Didn't upgrade equipment constantly like James. Just farmed steadily, conventionally, did what everyone else did. Robert's yields averaged 182 bushels through the 1990s and 2000s. Respectable, average. His expenses were moderate. He survived, didn't thrive. Robert retired in 2020, sold for $3,400 per acre, $904,000. After taxes and expenses, netted about $1.4 million. Good outcome, but again, less than Frank. The comparison is stark. Carl, one done, 120 acres. Aggressive expansion, lost farm, netted $348,800. James, 720 acres. Equipment focus, netted $1. $6 million. Robert, 560 acres, conventional farming, netted $1.4 million. Frank, 800 acres, soil improvement focus, netted $3.6 million after selling for $4.9 million. Frank had middle acreage but highest net worth. Why? Because he built per acre value instead of total acres. The specific improvements Frank made over 40 years tell the story of patient wealth creation. Phase 1. 1985-1990, soil testing and pH correction. 1985, first comprehensive soil test. Cost, $800. Results showed pH averaging 5.8, too acidic, organic matter 2.9% low, phosphorus marginal, potassium marginal. 1985-1987, applied 3.2 tons per acre agricultural lime. Cost, $28 per ton delivered and spread. Total, $71,680 over 3 years. Result, pH rose from 5.8 to 6.4 by 1988. Corn yields increased from 168 bushels average to 181 bushels average. The 13-bushel increase at 240 corn was 31.20 per acre extra income. On 800 acres, 24,960 annual increase. Lime investment paid back in 3 years. Phase 2, 1987-1995, drainage tile Frank tiled systematically. Started with worst 40 acres in 1987, installed pattern tile at 40-foot spacing, depth 4 feet. Cost in 1987, $620 per acre installed. Total, $24,800. Those 40 acres had been his lowest yielding, averaged 142 bushels. After tiling, jumped to 176 bushels by 1989, gain 34 bushels per acre. At 250 corn, $85 per acre extra income, $3,400 annually. Tile paid back in 3 years. Frank tiled 40 to 60 acres per year through 1995. Total investment by 1995, $197,000, but his lowest yielding ground became his most consistent. Wet spots disappeared. He could plant earlier, harvest later. Continued tiling through 2019. Total investment, $427,000, but the income gain was permanent and compounding. Phase 3, 1989-2000. Cover crops and organic matter. Frank started cover crops in 1989 with 20 acres of winter rye planted after corn harvest. Cost, $22 per acre for seed and planting. His neighbors mocked him. Frank's planting crops he won't harvest. He's lost his mind. But Frank understood soil biology. Cover crops prevented erosion, added organic matter when terminated, fixed nitrogen, broke pest cycles. By 1995, Frank was cover cropping his entire rotation, 400 acres annually. Cost, $8,800 per year. His neighbors said, "That's $9,000 wasted annually." But Frank's organic matter climbed from 2.9% in 1985 to 3.8% by 1995 to 4.6% by 2005 to 5.8% by 2020. Each percentage point of organic matter improvement increased water holding capacity, nutrient availability, and yield potential. The yield numbers proved it. By 2000, Frank's average was 206 bushels. County average was 178. His 28-bushel advantage at $2.10 corn was $58.80 per acre extra income, $47,040 total annually. His $8,800 cover crop investment generated $47,040 additional income. Return on investment, 535% annually. Phase 4, 2000-2020, infrastructure and income diversification. Frank built his grain storage in stages. First bin in 1988, 20,000 bushels cost $42,000. Second bin 1993, 25,000 bushels cost $54,000. Third through sixth bins between 1998 and 2006, total additional 65,000 bushels cost $288,000. His neighbors asked, "Why build storage? Elevators are convenient." Frank's answer, "Storage means I control my marketing. I sell when prices peak, not when harvest forces me to sell. And I rent storage to neighbors who don't have their own." Frank's storage rental income averaged $8,400 annually from 2010 to 2024. 14 years times $8,400 equals $257,600 income from infrastructure. His shop building cost $156,000 in 1994, massive for a 800-acre operation. Neighbors said, "Way too big for your operation," but Frank did all his own maintenance. Saved approximately $12,000 annually in mechanic bills. Over 30 years, $360,000 saved. Shop paid for itself twice over. When Daniel and Rebecca Trent evaluated Frank's farm in 2024, they didn't just see 800 acres. They saw a complete, optimized system, soil with 5. 8% organic matter that held nutrients and water better than any farm in the county, complete tile drainage, ensuring consistent yields regardless of weather, infrastructure that generated passive income and reduced operating costs, yield history, proving 34 bushels per acre above county average, timber on marginal ground, generating $380,000 additional value, irrigation capability for drought years. They calculated the income potential. 800 acres at 221 bushel average equals 176,800 bushels. At 420 corn, that's $742 to $560 gross. With Frank's low operating costs, no debt, good equipment maintenance, efficient practices, net income approximately $320,000 annually. At $320,000 annual net, capitalized at 6% return, the income value alone was $533 million. The land value, infrastructure and timber were almost bonus. That's why Rebecca Trent said Frank was underpriced at $5 million. She was right. Tom Bradford learned this lesson deeply. After Frank's sale closed, Tom started evaluating every farm listing differently. In January 2025, Tom listed a 960-acre farm for $3.8 million, $3,958 per acre, above market rate of $30,500. Why? Because the farmer had soil organic matter of 4.9% complete tile and yields averaging 208 bushels. The farm sold in 42 days for asking price. In March 2025, Tom listed a 640-acre farm for asking price of $2.2 million, $3,137 per acre, below market. Why? Because soil tests showed organic matter of 2.3%, no tile, yields averaging 171 bushels, and deferred maintenance. That farm sat on market for 6 months, finally sold for $2.0 million. Tom realized good soil at premium price sells faster than poor soil at discount. Buyers were learning to value fundamentals. By late 2025, Tom had shifted his entire business model. Instead of just listing farms, he started consulting with farmers on value building. Want to sell your farm for maximum value? Start improving it now. Test your soil, tile your wet spots, build organic matter through cover crops, document everything. In 5 years, you'll sell for 20 to 30% premium. 6 farmers hired him for this consulting. Tom charged $8,000 per farm for comprehensive assessment and improvement recommendations, made $48,000 in consulting fees, plus positioned himself to list those farms when they sold. The Morrison Method farmers, the group inspired by Frank, grew from 6 farms in 2025 to 23 farms by early 2026. They met quarterly, shared strategies, supported each other. Daniel and Rebecca Trent led the group. They'd learned from Frank, now taught others. Their second-year yields on Frank's former farm, 219 bushels, only 2 bushels below Frank's 40-year average. They were mastering the system. At the May 2025 Morrison Method meeting, Daniel presented, "We've cut our fertilizer costs by 18% through better organic matter and cover crops. Our nitrogen needs dropped from 175 pounds per acre to 142 pounds, saved $14,000 this year alone." Another farmer, Lisa Zhang, reported, "I installed tile on my worst 80 acres last fall. Cost me $52,000. This spring, those acres planted a week earlier than before because they drained faster. I expect yield increase of at least 20 bushels per acre. That's $8,000 extra income annually. Tile pays back in 6 years." The movement was working. Farmers were shifting from acreage focus to per-acre value focus. Tom Bradford spoke at the November 2025 meeting. 2 years ago, I laughed at Frank Morrison when he said his farm was worth $5 million. I judged by appearance. He wore old clothes, drove an old truck, looked unsuccessful. I was wrong. Frank was more successful than every farmer I knew who looked successful. He taught me that wealth is built invisibly, in soil you can't see, in infrastructure nobody notices, in disciplines nobody appreciates, until you sell. Then everyone sees it. Frank Morrison attended that meeting. At age 75, retired, comfortable, he came to encourage the new generation. "I spent 40 years being mocked," Frank said. "My neighbors thought I was wasting money on lime and tile and cover crops. They thought I was behind because I didn't expand or buy new equipment. They measured success by acres and equipment. I measured by soil, health and yields. They're mostly gone now, lost farms, retired poor, surviving barely. I built 5 million in value they couldn't see. The lesson? Real wealth is built in fundamentals, not flash. Focus on what matters. Ignore what doesn't." Standing ovation, 23 farmers applauding a man who'd proven patience beats aggression, fundamentals beat fashion. The farmer said his farm was worth 5 million. The dealer laughed, then got shocked when every dollar was justified. 40 years of work nobody valued created value everyone wanted. Sometimes the poorest-looking farmer is the richest, sometimes the richest-looking farmer is the poorest. Appearances deceive, soil tests don't.